to The Arc of Justice, a new series on Brookline Interactive Group's Big TV. My name is Eric Hyett. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. So said Dr. Martin Luther King at the National Cathedral in 1968. It's been 52 years since that speech, and one critique I've heard of Dr. King's words is that the arc needs to stop bending and actually get there. Of course, Dr. King believed that we can get there, and that's why this show is called The Arc of Justice. On this show, I'll be interviewing some of the most fascinating Brookline stakeholders. Stakeholders is my term for people who live in Brookline, work in Brookline, commute through Brookline, live immediately adjacent to Brookline, or have other connections to this town. My guests are people of color, and I have to acknowledge their courage for the personal risk they are taking by appearing on air and sharing their stories. All my guests are offering constructive criticism of the town of Brookline, constructive criticism of our select board and our public safety officials. It's been hard enough for me, a white male, to speak up on issues of race and policing in my hometown. In the past year alone, I've been called ignorant, a communist, and other names by white Brookline residents seeking to defend the status quo. For my guests on the Arc of Justice, the experiences they've been through are far worse than name-calling. These are the daily survivors of institutional racism in our community and are here to offer testimony and their vision for change. I understand that for people of color, it is many more times difficult to be heard, and the risk for them of speaking up is much greater than mine. So I acknowledge the courage of all for coming forward. My guest this week is Chiuba Obele. Chiuba is a racial justice activist and Brookline stakeholder known for his outspokenness and willingness to call out institutional racism on the spot. Chiuba and I actually recorded this interview a few months ago, but it is even more relevant today as the town struggles to deal with a crude joke and pantomime of a chokehold made by our select board chair Bernard Green. I am so happy to welcome Chiuba Obele as my first guest on the Arc of Justice. Good morning to you, sir. So this is like 12 noon on a Sunday.
So should I say good afternoon in that case?
Well, no, I'm just, has it been kind of a long day for you?
Well, we had a protest right outside Bernard Green's condo, and it was, it was great. We had wonderful speakers. We had a decent turnout. About 50 people came. And overall, it was pretty good. We also had people from the Globe and WBZ also there. And there were a couple of counter-protesters, believe it or not, people who showed up to disrupt the event. But we managed to get a hold of it. And overall, it was successful. It was successful.
Well, don't you feel like that's a sign that you're winning when you've generated counter-protesters waking up at 5 o'clock or whatever in the morning? Like, that's got to be a sign that your message is reaching people.
Yeah, exactly.
So I would love to, this is like an amazing opportunity for me to get to like spend a half hour with you on chatting on camera. And you, as you know, you're my first guest on this new show, The Arc of Justice. So before we even get into like the what of this morning and how that all came to be, I would love to know some things about you yourself, especially what I don't know how to put it, but I have asking everyone two questions. One is what drew them to Brookline, and then the second is how did they sort of wake up a political consciousness and become engaged in activism. So I would love to know a little bit about your personal history, just kind of what got you to this historic moment of today.
Absolutely. So I started coming to Brookline back in 2014 after meeting my girlfriend, Helene there. We met at a prison reform conference that was sponsored by clergy, and we developed a relationship, and I started coming to her home in Brookline on a weekly basis. So I stayed in Brookline for much of the week for several years. And then recently, about maybe a year ago, Helene was running a short-term rental that got shut down by the town. And we started to, look into ways to fight that. And I got involved with a group of Airbnb hosts who started to lobby and insist that the town change its policy. So I got into activism through that, just engaging in basic lobbying, sending emails and whatnot. And then this whole thing with George Floyd started happening on Memorial Day. And that triggered a bunch of protests. And this issue of police violence and defunding the police suddenly became a mainstream topic. So it kind of drew me in. And I got involved with a local group that's called Brookline Budget Justice that was working with, working with town meeting members to inform them about the budget and also police spending. So that was how I became politically active in Brookline.
Is this in your bones? Do you come from a history of activism? I mean, I think it's very interesting that everyone in Brookline is starting to know who you are because of your activism, but this is fairly recent for a lot of us. It sounds like you've been at this for much longer than most Brookline residents.
Well, I do have a background as an organizer, but specifically getting involved in Brookline politics, that's kind of a new thing for me. And, I still have a lot to learn, and I've made a couple mistakes. But so far I managed to do well. And we had this event, and, it was a challenging event because we are going up against the mainstream establishment in Brookline. We're going up against the power structure. Bernard Green represents the status quo, and so challenging him directly is symbolic. It's a symbolic act of defiance and resistance. And when you're an activist, these kinds of struggles, these kinds of battles are what you come to expect.
Can I ask a really tough question? Is it harder in that Bernard Green is black? Does it take a, you know what I mean? Does it change your view of him in any way, shape, or form?
Well, I appreciate how difficult it is to be black in America, and I also understand that there are too few elected black officials. But I think Bernard Green is certainly a respectable person. He's been part of the community for a number of years, and he probably is a very hard worker because being a select board is virtually an unpaid position. The amount of salary you get is very minimal. So his passion is politics, and I appreciate the fact that he's a hard worker, but I think there are too many issues where he's on the wrong side of things. And when it comes to holding police accountable and defunding the police in order to fund social services and schools and affordable housing, he unfortunately spoke out against those budget cuts, very modest budget cuts of 10 or 15%. And so we decided, me and a bunch of fellow activists, we decided that we were going to directly confront him. And, it was pretty controversial. I know that when I informed town meeting members about it, a lot of them were unhappy. They thought I was being disruptive. They thought that I would disturb neighbors. They even called it harassment. But we view this as a symbolic act of resistance, and going straight to where Bernard Green lives shows that we're willing to do whatever it takes to win this battle. Like I said, we had a great turnout. We had wonderful speakers, and I'm very satisfied with what we've done.
You certainly have the town's attention right now, both in the media, local media, in the townwide Facebook discussion. The town is listening. Do you consider yourself a part of a community? I mean, I view you as I first met you through your activism in the short-term rental community, which is very like well-defined, well-organized lobby now in the town. You know that there, and you are presenting the pros and cons of that argument as part of a broader argument about economic justice in Brookline. I guess I'm wondering which groups do you feel part of right now, or is it still sort of taking shape in terms of?
That's a very good question. So, I happen to have a knack of being controversial. It's just that's part of being an activism. It just happens to be the case that I'm very outspoken, both online and through my interactions with the town government. I'm very outspoken, and I'm willing to be honest and do whatever it takes to, be an advocate for the issues that I'm passionate about. But to your question, I think that there is a growing community that's trying to find its voice when it comes to groups like Grassroots Brookline and Brookline Budget Justice. These are groups of people in their 20s who are still somewhat new to activism, and they're all trying to find their voice just like me. But there's one thing we have in common is that we're super passionate and we're willing to take on the status quo.
Yeah, I mean, what I view is then the reason I wanted you first on the show is you've been willing more than a lot of people to just put your stuff out there under your own name. Not be like, okay, I represent this organization, but like I'm speaking me, I'm telling my truth. This is where I'm coming from. You've told some pretty compelling and shocking to a lot of people, not maybe to me, stories about the Brookline police, ways that you've been treated. You've been very out there under a brand of self, under like a, which is
just right. And you have to be that way. If you're going to, it's not easy being black because when you're black, there's a target on you. But I feel that being black has taught me how to survive and how to find my own voice in America. And Brookline has been, unfortunately, it's let a lot of black people down. But I'm trying to call attention to not just racism on a personal level, but systemic racism in Brookline, because that's something that I feel a lot of people are beginning to become aware of. And it's all tied into all these other issues of holding police accountable and, how we spend our money on police departments. And I think I think we're doing great work. I really think we're doing great work.
Well, I feel that you've broken through to people in a way that they're starting to listen, and I feel that we're all part of a broader social movement in this community.
That's right. That's right.
But you must, at some level, have some hope for Brookline, or you would just leave and move to a fairer community somewhere. You must believe, a part of you, that things can change here. I don't want to put thoughts in your head, but do you think that's true?
Well, we were, speaking for my fellow activists and organizers, we were very disappointed with the town's decision not to support modest budget cuts to the police spending. And it remains to be seen whether or not our leaders are willing to listen to us. We had to go out on the street in order to have our voices heard. We had to go out on the streets in order to make a message. And people are paying attention. So despite losing the legislative battle, we're trying to target people's hearts and minds. We're trying to educate them. We're trying to inspire them. And we're trying to galvanize them to action. So do I think that there's hope for Brookline? That remains to be seen. Maybe. Maybe there's hope.
That's fair enough. It's tough,
but
right?
But it all comes down to the sacrifices that we make as activists and organizers. You have to believe that change is possible.
So you made a really interesting comment just now, like right before we lost the connection. You said it's not easy being black.
Right. Exactly. It's not easy being black.
It's something I can never know. Do you know what I mean? I can work as an anti-racist for my whole life, but I can't know what that's like. But would you say that when you speak with other Brookline people about this topic, do you think that you're starting to see more people understand what you mean when you say that statement?
I think so. And just going back to your earlier question, I do feel there's hope for Brookline, but it's difficult to see that hope when you put all your work into lobbying only to see it fail. But I do feel that this is not the end. I feel this is the beginning of the fight. So I just wanted to add that. Now, to answer this question about what it's like being black in Brookline, I feel like there's just so few of us. And it's kind of like, we get these really negative experiences with the police, and there's so few of us in town government. I mean, you have people like Bernard Green, but there's so few other black men involved in our politics. So I feel that being black, especially because we represent some of the most underserved parts of Brookline, and I think that's another problem. But I do feel that given the recent turn of events with the protests of George Floyd, I think people are starting to become more aware of racism and how racism pervades our society. People are beginning to wake up, and that's a good sign of that there is hope for Brookline.
I would have been fine if you said there's no hope, by the way, for Brookline. I do have some African-American friends who are just basically like, no, like absolutely no. I have no hope for this place. I live here because I need to. But I had to suspect from your high degree of engagement and your willingness to put your own personal name on things that you do actually think there's a chance to improve things. Maybe if we're like a 4 out of 10 right now, maybe we can move up to a 5 or a 6. That's all I'm hoping, like, is incremental change. People here are terrified of systemic change. They're terrified of it.
Yes. And I do want to say that radical change is very hard, but you have people like Raul Fernandez, who represents what I feel the best that Brookline has to offer in terms of his leadership, in terms of his anti-racism work and his efforts to diversify town government. I think that Raul Fernandez can be a role model for people and activists like myself, that there is a place for getting involved in government. But I also feel like we have to reject the status quo. And part of that means marching out on the street and calling for immediate change. People are becoming restless. They're very eager for a change in things. And I feel that between Raul Fernandez and these young activists, I think Brookline has a bright future ahead of it. So that's why I say there's hope. And being black in Brookline is difficult, but I feel that there's also solidarity that's being created because our allies, our white allies, are beginning to speak up, and they're marching on the streets with us, and they're protesting with us, and we just got to translate that into legislative victories, and we also have to put forward candidates who can win elections and become part of town government.
Yes, we do.
And I would also add, Eric, that we need people like you to also run for office. So I hope that's something that you definitely consider.
The way I view this, is that next year there are 2 seats available on the select board, and both of those seat holders, Bernard Green and Nancy Heller, have not voted the way I would like to see them vote over and over again.
That's why we need people like you.
Yeah, we say people like me, but we need one more person just like me who's willing to run. Do you know what I mean? I would much rather run as part of a townwide platform of progressives running for every seat of town meeting, progressive contesting the select board, the school committee, all of our townwide offices. It would be so much easier next time if we're all running as a group. And that's why I'm interested in activism. It's why I'm spending my time on a Sunday with someone like you who's on the literal front lines. I've told you before, I'm immunocompromised. I'm not allowed to be outdoors protesting, but I'm very much there with you in spirit, and I couldn't be more proud of you and the other homegrown activists, myself included, a bunch of us that just are saying no to the status quo. But systemic change is right. It's like I see that of course you're right about that. I want to make sure I don't let you go today without asking your opinion on the police chief's resignation. What's going on with that?
Well, I feel that there's something that prompted it, and we don't know what it is. It might have been related to just people being eager to start fresh. But it seemed to have even taken the select board by surprise. So it's kind of a mystery. But I also feel that there's an opportunity for change here. And we need systemic change. So it's not just about one person losing their job. It's about whether or not we're going to be bold enough to experiment with new ideas about public safety. So I appreciate and welcome his resignation because I don't think he's done the best job. But I also feel that there are underlying problems with how we do policing in Brookline. And until those underlying issues are addressed, it won't make a difference who is leading that department. That's just my personal opinion.
I've been a little concerned about the police chief resignations in all of these other towns. I feel like the chiefs are the ones that can help set the message. Bringing in a new chief is automatically going to be complicated, and I wonder if it isn't like part of an effort to slow down the process of reform by creating like a sort of a power vacuum at the top and thereby a lack of accountability. I worry about these things. At the same time, as you said, it does create an opportunity.
That's right. Absolutely. And it could lead to real change. One thing that I don't know if you were going to bring this up, but there's that task force that Raul Fernandez called for. And that task force does represent potential of assuming that the people on it are actually willing to consider alternatives to policing as we know it. And I think as long as we're transparent and really honest about changing things, then things like a task force would be very beneficial. And maybe that's part of the discussion about who we're going to put as police chief.
I would love to see that task force have real teeth and be activated.
Yeah.
I mean, Raul's a hero to me, to a lot of us in the town, and he's at the same time acutely aware of being just one vote and potentially four the other way. Exactly. I suppose he feels the task force is the very best we can do right now, and I share your concern that the task force members be appointed with a diversity of viewpoints and not come in with strong, pro-police opinions or even too strong anti-police. I'd rather they be people that are reimaginers, which is Raul's terminology. He wants to reimagine policing. He has to get those task force members approved by the rest of the select board. So it's going to be a really interesting challenge. Like, I'm a little afraid to serve on a select board appointed committee for the reasons that you've mentioned.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly. There's going to be a lot of pressure on the task force to come up with real proposals. But I hate to keep going after him because, like you said, he is a Black person. And it's already hard enough being Black in America. When you're an elected official, the spotlight is on you. But I do have to say, when Bernard Green was interviewed by Jenna Fisher of Patch.com. He did remark that the kind of change that he imagines is not radical revolutionary change, but a change that makes sense within the context of Brookline. But what makes sense in the context of Brookline does not necessarily work for Black people. Brookline has let Black people down. We're more likely to be stopped, we're more likely to be questioned, we're more likely to be arrested, and we're more likely to be poor. And I think we do need revolutionary change, despite what Bernard Green said. It's not good enough. We have to do more and strive more than what makes sense in the context of Brookline. Anything less will only preserve the status quo.
Wow, that is really nicely articulated. I really appreciate, having your just clear perspective on why radical change is required. In a way, like during the COVID era, it's hard to get that message out. I appreciate that you've been actually outdoors, like messaging it to people as loudly as you can. What's for you going forward in terms of, I'll be lucky enough to air this. It should hopefully lift up your message a little bit even more. What are you thinking of going forward to keep this alive, keep it hot?
Hey, I am just getting started, I'm just getting started. Technically, and I've told people this, I'm technically still a resident of Boston, but I intend at the soonest possible time, I intend to change my resident status so that I'm going to be eligible to run for town meeting member, which, is a opportunity to get further involved in politics. And I also want to mention not just Raul, but I also want to mention Deborah Brown, Mike Offner. I believe that they are some of the more progressive voices in town meeting I'll say this, Eric. I feel that town meeting should represent the diverse interests of Brookline. I think town meeting is overwhelmingly white. I think it's overwhelmingly upper class. And it does not represent the interests of renters. It does not represent the interests of young people, because people tend to be relatively older and richer than poor folks. So I would like to see that change. I would like to see more young people run for town meeting member. I'd like to see people who are people of color run for town meeting members, because that's the only way that we're going to win battles that lie ahead of us.
Well, thank you so much for saying that and for looking out for others. I think that everyone's concern with town meeting is just what you stated, that it skews older, whiter, and richer than the rest of the town. It skews toward homeowners, etc. But you're proving everyone wrong who says that younger people don't care or aren't active enough. Like, you are obviously proving them wrong at the same time. And I think that what will really change things is when we get a large enough group of people to contest every seat. I was so bummed out that there's uncontested seats on our town government.
Yeah, we've got to change that. We've got to get more people of color and more young people involved in local politics, because that's the only way that we're going to lead to real change. So I appreciate the fact that there's so many young folks who want to protest, but they all need to step up no, really, I'm serious. They all need to step up and try to enter, being a legislator, being a lawmaker. We want change to come from the outside, but change can also come from the inside. So that's how I see the issue.
Thank you so much. Well, look, this is pretty much more footage than we're even going to be able to use. But before I go, is there anything I didn't ask that you wanted me to, or something that you want to mention?
So police spending is out of control, and I'm part of the group currently that's asking for a 50% budget cut. And that was the theme of our protest today. 50% budget cut to reinvest that money and our schools and social services and affordable housing. And when you take that money away from the police department, you can invest in other ways to produce public safety. You can send social workers to deal with mental health crises. You can send unarmed people to perform basic tasks that don't involve crime. So all this is part of creating systemic change. So when we say that we want a 50% budget cut, it's not to punish the police. It's to make a better Brookline for everyone.
Well, I really appreciate your drawing that distinction. I'm one of the people that's not threatened or afraid when you talk about a 50% budget cut because, like you, I've done my homework into the police and their behaviors. I've also seen how other communities have been able to successfully redeploy those assets, put it more into social workers. Brookline Budget Justice put out some nice slides that made it easy to see. I associate you with like always having a lot of data around you. I encourage you to just keep gathering data on communities that have been able to successfully defund while reinvesting, like you said, in social services and schools, places where we really are underinvesting now.
Right.
So yeah, you can count me as an ally and as one of the Brookline people who are not afraid of that 50% number. But I personally know a lot of activists in Brookline who are like, "Oh, he's saying 50%, like that's a huge amount." I really admire you for just holding the line on that and explaining that you're not talking about just slash and burn. You're talking about making targeted cuts and shifting the funding into programs that will be just as effective. I have no complaint with the way you guys have phrased it. The language seems very fine to me. So it makes me question the underlying motivations of the people who are so against it, and it makes me think we all have an education task ahead of us to kind of educate the town.
Exactly, and I do want to emphasize that I'm still very much new to Brookline politics, and I'm perfectly okay telling the truth, even if it results in me burning bridges or alienating people. I feel that it's more important to be honest when we have a discussion about public safety and police spending because, being a radical person, you can question whether reform is sufficient. I believe that we need more than reform. I believe that we need revolution. So I think people like me tend to be more disruptive than the average person, but it's all for a good cause.
I just have to thank you for it so much on the town's behalf.
And it's all for a good cause because everything I do in Brookline, I do in the name of justice.
Well, thank you so much, Chiuba. It's been really fun chatting with you today.